Hey guys, it's Paradise, and as you may know if you've been following the channel, we got to play a good chunk of Dragon Age The Veilguard, so I was racking my brain as to what you guys would want to see, and of course the classes and specializations, the abilities you get and all that good stuff is probably on the top of the list for many people. So here what I've done is actually gone through the skill trees and specializations of each of the three classes, the Mage, Rogue and Warrior, throughout my playthrough at various different sections in the game, so we can get a good look at the abilities and things you unlock and a gist of the playstyle that you can sort of aim for depending on your preference. Now I have had to edit this down pretty massively in order to make it sort of concise enough for you guys to watch and enjoy and get some good information, but it should still be clear enough to follow through and get an idea of each of the classes. Each of the classes starts off in the center of the skill tree with some very core features, your starting ability and ultimate, but as you go outside of that, you start to get more passive nodes and extra abilities, and then beyond that in the corners you have the actual specializations that you branch out into, and this sort of formulates your build, and we will show each of the specializations skill tree for each of the classes here. I did actually get to play each of the classes, the Rogue, Mage and Warrior, and I actually did get to try a few of these specializations as well. As you can see here, there is a lot of nodes, so I didn't go over each one, but they're basically a lot of passive bonuses. However, the ones I am hovering over, the sort of sideways squares, these are actual abilities that you can use in your 3 ability slots in combat, so I wanted to highlight these ones as they're the ones that interested me most. So there is a couple more skills to go through here for the Rogue, and then we'll jump into the specializations. So our first specialization for the Rogue is the Duelist, and you can see here it says draw your steel, parry and dodge past enemies to gain strength with every strike. This is essentially the Antivan Crow specialization and is more so about obviously parrying and using your dagger and sword in melee. Essentially, if you want to focus fully in on melee and doing a flurry of rapid attacks and some very cool abilities that again are to do with melee and chaining your attacks together, then the Duelist here might be the build that you want to branch out into. And next up we have the Sabotuer, a very different playstyle. You're going to deploy explosives and turrets that devastate enemies, and this even includes a crazy ability where the game kind of turns into an FPS as you rapidly shoot this contraption and then throw it at enemies to explode. This is the Lords of Fortune specialization, and it really is all about explosives and traps and of course your turret, so if that's a playstyle you like the sound of, this is a very interesting one to try. And next up we have the Veil Ranger. This is the Veil Jumper's specialization, and this is all about infusing your arrows with powerful magic, bouncing arrows, crazy stuff if you like focusing in on the bow and arrow gameplay. To be honest, this one is really intriguing me and I didn't get to try this one out, but from the abilities and nodes as you'll see, it is looking pretty amazing. And then we have the Mage class, and this one was very surprising to me, given how different it plays now that we're basically a full action RPG. I particularly liked the ultimate ability here, which was kind of like a Kamehameha laser beam, and it really did shred everything you used it on. But again, the sort of core nodes here in the middle are more fundamental to the class, while as you spread out, you get to more additive things and of course the extra abilities. Overall, although the Mage wasn't my preference out of all the three classes, which is surprising given I loved the Mage in all of the previous Dragon Age games, it did have an interesting playstyle, being able to switch between a sort of focus and dagger and a staff, both of which had a very different feel in combat, one being able to parry and the other blocking. So depending on your preference, you may enjoy the Mage if you do like sort of a more controlling the battlefield playstyle, where you will be attacking from mostly ranged or mid-range, and you will be kiting a lot as the enemies try to get to you. And for our first mage specialization, we have the Death Caller. This is the Morn Watcher's specialization. You're going to use the forces of life and death to drain your enemies and power up your own spells. I believe this is sort of their twist on the Necromancer, which formerly was like the Blood Mage in the old games, which I would really like to see come back. And I did actually talk to them about this during their Q&A in the event. They essentially said that they are open to doing the Blood Mage, but they would want to do it right and kind of make it like its own class entirely, given the implications it has on the story and world, which is fair enough. It kind of gives me a vibe of the Dark Urge that you have in Baldur's Gate 3 and how that's its kind of own thing as a background, so I would love to see them do that. But this is kind of like, you could say, an iteration on the Necromancer from Inquisition. It has a lot of AoEs and a lot of necrotic damage, and honestly I do like the look of it. And now we have the Evoker, which is the Shadow Dragon's specialization, and this is actually looking pretty cool. A lot of the coolest mages' visual effects and spells, in my opinion, actually come from this specialization. It's all about controlling the battlefield and dealing massive damage with your spells to take down enemies. It's a much more traditional style of mage, where you're going to be doing big, flashy spells at your foes. So if you want to lean into a more traditional ranged control and damage dealing mage, this might be the specialization you want to lean into. Next is a very interesting one, the Spellblade. This is the Antivan Crow, I believe, specialization, and this is all about wielding a dagger and orb and doing spells that are basically close range with magical blades flying around you and towards your enemies. This one is probably one of the mage specializations that intrigues me the most, and I didn't get to try it out. But I always loved playing the Knight Enchanter in Inquisition, and this is kind of in that vibe, maybe a rework or a new vision of what that specialization kind of was. So if you want to be a more close range mage, this is where you want to be. And then we have the Warrior, which I have to say was actually feeling very good in Veilguard, given that it's a full action RPG and the Warrior is a bit more tanky. You have your sword and shield, so you can parry, you can block, and you have two-handed weapons, so you can go ham with big meaty swings. You have gap closing abilities, you have big slams, AoEs, you even have some abilities that give you like a shield around you that automatically parries and damages enemies. This one, in terms of the minute-to-minute gameplay and combat, felt very strong. Again, I think it's because of the shift to an even bigger focus on the action in combat. So if you do like to be in the thick of it, fighting enemies up close and personal, the Warrior is kind of like the one you want to be, but don't sleep on the Rogue. The daggers of the Rogue and the parrying and the dodging was also very good and fun too. There's a lot of cool abilities to get through, so I'll let you guys check them out. So we're starting off with the Champion Specialization. This is for the Grey Wardens out there, and this is more of a focus on the sword and shield playstyle if you want to lean into that. And having played both, I did prefer the two-handed, but I did try a lot of the sword and shield and it is still pretty meaty and fun. But this specialization in particular has some very flashy and cool moves, with things like the Warden's Fire ultimate where you call in a barrage of arrows and then some kind of ballista or catapult strike. Lots of AoEs and cool moves in this. If you want to lean into being more tanky and the bulwark of your team, then I would recommend this as the specialization to pick. And then we have the Slayer, which is the Lord of Fortune's specialization, and this one's really cool because it kind of focuses on using a bunch of different, almost spectral weapons. It leans into the two-handed playstyle. It's all about breaking enemy defenses, doing quick maneuvers and sort of gap closers, and honestly, this one is just flashy as anything. So if you want to be like the spectacle on the battlefield, focusing on that two-handed weapon playstyle, the Slayer is the obvious choice. And next up we have the Reaper. This is from the Mornwatch, and this one is one that I personally did get to try. The ultimate, as you can see here with that sort of spectral tornado, is insane to use and I really did enjoy that, but the rest of the playstyle is actually really interesting and maybe not quite what it seems. It was all about priming enemies and then detonating them with your shield throw, which you could enhance to an explosive shield throw, and you could even siphon health off of enemies. So in a way you could be very tanky if you played this one right, but you really did have to lean into the shield throwing, that sort of Captain America shield bounce that you can do in this, if you want to go into the Reaper. It is its own kind of distinct playstyle, it definitely feels satisfying to pull off, but again it's a unique playstyle where you won't be smashing things as much because you're going to be throwing your shield in order to detonate and make massive explosions. Well guys, I hope this was interesting and helpful and gave you a good look at all of the different classes and specializations and an idea of what build you might want to go into. Do make sure you're subscribed down below for more Dragon Age and videos on your favourite games coming very, very soon.